Hello and welcome. Thank you for attending Multi-State Licensing and Telehealth. I'm your host, Chuck Sherquist, Director of Sales at Therapy Sites, and with me is Andrea Camp, Sales Manager at Therapy Sites. Here at Therapy Sites, we specialize in building and designing websites and online marketing solutions specifically for therapists, ultimately helping therapists acquire new patients. I'd like to personally welcome each and every one of you to this free educational event. We're really excited to be here with all of you today and welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Stanton, a licensed psychologist in California. She graduated from San Diego State University with a BA in English and Psychology, Wesleyan University with a Master's in Psychology, and then Southern California Seminary with a Master's in Psychology Doctorate in Clinical Psychology. Dr. Stanton's other professional roles have included Vice President for Academics, Department Chair, Associate Professor, and since 2011, she's also served as a content developer, instructor, study coach for Triad Behavioral Health. Currently, she has a private practice in Southern California. In addition to treating individuals, families, and couples, she conducts psychological evaluations, substance abuse assessments, child custody, evaluations, and bonding studies. She is certified in child and adolescent anxiety treatment and has also served as an expert witness. I can't wait to hear her speak. I think this is going to be a really great webinar on a very interesting topic. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. So during today's sessions, we'll have a Q&A session towards the end. We love for you to take part in that and participate. So if you take a look at your GoToWebinar control panel, on there you'll see a questions tab. Feel free to use that tab to answer any questions that we have, ask any questions of your own, and make any comments that you may have. And after the webinar has been concluded, we do have a quick survey that we'd love to hear your feedback. So now that we have all that taken care of, let's meet our presenter, Dr. Elizabeth Stanton. Take it away, Dr. Stanton.
Why, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm excited to be able to share some hopefully helpful information with you all when it comes to multi-state licensing and navigating the world of telehealth, which is, I think, upon all of us at this point. So thank you very much for that. Now, as we get started this morning, as Chuck stated, there'll be questions at the end. So please make sure you take note of those as we go along. And also mentioned is about Triad. So Triad is a company that provides education, community, and career resources to behavioral and mental health professionals, institutions, organizations, and employers. We have over 45 years of experience of supporting behavioral and mental health professionals, and we're excited to broaden our community today through our partnership with Therapy Sites to help you navigate the world of multi-state licensing and telehealth. Again, thank you all for joining us. Now, the plan for this afternoon is for us to discuss the benefits of multi-state licensing, some of the complexities that are also associated with that, and also what it means to have license portability. Now, for some of us, we will come from the angle of psychology in terms of the psychologist license. Some of us will come from the MFT perspective, some social work and counseling. And so while I'm certainly not claiming to be an expert in any of the areas, I do feel that I'm going to be able to give you some information that'll get you started on the path to make sure you get the information you need if this is something that is of interest to you, which I really hope that at some point in your career you do consider multi-state licensing, as it does broaden our ability and our range when it comes to helping people. Now, in addition to things to consider as we get started, multi-state licensing is a conversation that has such a broad nature that it's really going to depend on the state that you are currently licensed in and the state that you are considering becoming newly licensed in as a prospective clinician. So as we have this discussion and moving forward this afternoon, I want to make sure that you are aware that this is, again, more of a general overview discussion about ways to approach the process and different things to consider, not a discussion of any state-specific type of requirements. In addition to things to consider, we'll discuss some of the agencies that have helped develop protocol for portability, which we'll discuss more in a moment. And this is in an attempt to streamline the process. Now, I don't know everything. And again, I'm not an expert, but definitely, even in my own professional walk of considering multi-state licensing, want to be able to share this information with you. So as I said, the benefits of multi-state licensing are plenty. And as we think about not just being able to broaden our ability to help other people that would not necessarily be a part of our community per se, but it also gives us a way to broaden our opportunity if in the event something happens and we do have to relocate, or we're given the opportunity to do some work in a nearby state. So thinking about multi-licensing and going into this conversation also requires you to kind of put yourself into more of an entrepreneurial mindset of, okay, I have this license and how can I maximize all of the different approaches and ways to really use what you've worked so hard for. And so in this sort of entrepreneurial mindset, thinking about what makes sense. Maybe you aren't necessarily relocating or you haven't been offered any work in a nearby state, but it may make sense given where you are currently licensed to be able to have access to different populations that are residing in states, whether nearby or again, whatever it makes sense in terms of your goals for what you're doing with your practice and with your license. Now, it also gives us, as I said, an opportunity to be able to connect with folks via telehealth. We'll speak more about telehealth later in our discussion, but in terms of multi-state licensing, it's not that you necessarily, again, right, you don't necessarily have to relocate, but you definitely could be given the opportunity to do telehealth, which of course gives you the benefit of being able to do that from your home. And so that's something else to consider if you're just in the mindset again of maybe broadening your practice and wanting to increase the number of folks that you're working with. As I mentioned as well, extending your professional reach in terms of your client base, this can help when we're thinking about perhaps specializing in a particular area. You know, the more individuals that you can work with that are dealing with a particular type of challenge, then that can essentially make you an expert at some point and really give you a niche when it comes to a certain area. And so being able to do that in a broader range with a broader client base can also be helpful in terms of specialization. Now, the biggest goal, of course, is to increase public access to mental health care. And so if that is something that tends to be kind of your motivation, that alone is reason to consider thinking about ways to become licensed in other states and how that might make sense for where you're currently located. When we consider multi-state licensing, we also have to have the discussion of, the importance of making sure that you don't have any type of disciplinary actions against you or any malpractice blemishes, because that can make a challenge when it comes to becoming licensed in another state. Also making sure that you keep in mind that CEUs, as they're required for your current state, will also be required for other states as well. And there's different requirements and specifications. We have to make sure that, a certain number of them are in person, that only a certain number of them are online, etc. And so making sure that you're well aware of those different requirements for the various states that you may become licensed in. And then also when it comes to the renewal payments for the license, that may not fall at the same time as your current license. And so really that bookkeeping piece and making sure that you're on top of your game and prepared for that, even as you're thinking about this multi-state licensing opportunity. And then also with insurance panels, again, in different states, that will be, it will give you accessibility to various insurance companies, and thinking about as a way to not just connect with additional insurance companies, but more so to grow your practice even at the very beginning, and being able to broaden again that client base by having access to being on perhaps those, provider lists, and then also considering the different opportunities to become an EAP provider for the smaller companies that maybe are outside of the larger insurance companies. So that again, you're in this new state, and kind of where do you start? That's one place to begin in terms of thinking of that, but also considering it is a different state. So the way that the insurance process works, and perhaps even the accessibility to different individuals, may be different from the state that you're currently in, which isn't a big deal. It just means to go in with that mindset, knowing that some of these things are probably going to be slightly different. And again, marketing yourself as much as possible in various ways. So maybe going into a new state and thinking, okay, I'm gonna, send a welcome or an introduction letter and notice to various organizations to let them know about my services and what I have available. And again, just being thoughtful of those things as you go into the process. How can I market myself, and how can I get connected to really increase my client base? Now, we want to also make sure that you become very familiar with the board that governs whichever state you are also looking forward to. And we all know that the board not just has different requirements depending on which state you're in, and I can't stress that enough, but also that those requirements tend to change as the days go on. And so we want to stay consistent and aware of the various requirements and what may be required of you as you come into this new state for licensure. So again, just some bookkeeping things to just make sure that you're aware of that, and that you're following whatever the rules are for that particular state as you are perhaps conducting work in that. Now, of course, what that means is you're going to ask a lot of questions. As you begin this multi-state licensing process, know that not everyone is aware of the jargon or the different ways to, say multi-state licensing and how do I go about that. You might call someone and they're like, what? So you got to be prepared to kind of navigate this process, maybe hold some folks' hands so you can explain exactly what you're looking for, but be prepared to just ask as many questions as possible, do as much research as possible, and looking into what are the different requirements for the different states. And when you're doing research, keep in mind that there's plenty of websites that tend to be at face value, they look like, oh, this has great information, and they break everything down for you by state and what the state requirements are. But I would just say the bottom line is always going to be what that state board requirement explains, right? And so although those websites might be very helpful, I would watch out for anything that's a non-governmental website. If it doesn't have that .gov into it, it might not give you the exact information that's at least up to date that you're looking for. So always double check and make sure that the information that you're getting is accurate as well, because we'd hate to go down a trail that will lead you to just spending more time trying to get to this goal. So in terms of benefits, again, it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you get to be in different states and have access to different populations. And again, if in the event that you do have to relocate or are given one of those opportunities to have a case that's in a different state, you'll be able to take advantage of that. Now, some of the complexities, as I mentioned, not only are, different states requiring different things when it comes to becoming licensed, but other complexities that come along with obtaining licensure in other states also has to do with the inconsistencies, not just with the requirements, but also with even the titles. In various states, the licensure titles will vary depending on the level of license, and then you'll notice some states just call things a completely different thing. So just being familiar with that, right? Taking the time to go through and determine what actually applies to you in terms of what your qualifications and what would be appropriate for you to apply for. And then also, again, the scope of practice. Depending on that licensure title, it will also determine the scope of practice. And so being thoughtful of that as well, about what you want to be able to do in that state, and making sure that you seek to obtain a licensure that will allow you to do whatever those things are, right? We don't want to limit ourselves based on a misunderstanding of a license title. And then again, the exam requirements and education requirements tend to be different from state to state. And so we want to be thoughtful of that as well. And depending on the state requirement, you may or may not have to worry about an exam requirement or any further education requirements. But again, making sure that you're aware of what those are and not making the assumption that they are consistent across states. That would be ideal, but of course that is not the case. And we'll get a moment to talk about some of those agencies that are working to put together I guess a standard, so to speak, of what a seamless process could look like, so that these inconsistencies aren't such a hurdle to the individuals trying to become licensed in different states. But again, being aware of the various requirements and how they differ, not just in the exam requirements. As we all know, there is now the introduction of the EPPP2. So some states require that as of now, some states do not. And so being aware of that and knowing that if you are in a position where that is going to be a requirement, that you know, okay, what you're preparing yourself for. And then also in terms of the jurisprudence exam, we all have to, at some point consult with an ethics exam. Some states will require you to complete it no matter what. Some states might say, well, you've been licensed for this long, we're going to allow you to sort of just bring that over. And then some states have a different way of administering the test. Some will require you to go to an actual testing site, to which then you might prepare for it differently than a state that will allow you to take it open book. Right? So that's a whole different process. But again, all these things we want to take into consideration as we think about becoming licensed in another state. And I feel like as I list these things, that I'm sort of making them like all these different hurdles that you have to go through. And I don't want it to be that. I want it to be more that you're just aware of the different things that are before you, so that they don't feel like hurdles once you come upon them. Other things to consider in terms of education requirements / experience requirements. Some states have different hour requirements in terms of your supervised professional experience, and the range is anywhere from 1,500 to 4,000. And so again, being aware of the various state requirements. Some individuals that are already licensed and maybe their state required 3,000, and perhaps they're applying to a state that requires 4,000. It's not like an automatic, just because you're licensed, that gets waived, right? So there are some details that you want to be familiar with before making that assumption. Sometimes it can be, but not all the time, right? You want to be aware. And there's also, again, this idea of portability that really plays into whether or not states are going to accept what you've already done and allow you to kind of keep moving, or will you have to meet some of their additional requirements before you can become licensed. So this brings us to this idea of licensure portability. And that is the ability to basically take your qualifications from the state that you are currently licensed in, and then apply them for licensure in another state in order to be able to receive reciprocity, as we can think of it as, from state to state, to be able to say, I completed everything for California, so because I'm licensed here, that automatically gives me reciprocity or portability, in a sense, for me to be licensed, say, in Connecticut. And so licensure portability, it sounds like, this is like easy enough. We should have done this a long time ago, but unfortunately, it's not exactly the case, given the various mental health professional licensures that we have. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a way to totally make some consistent portability amongst all the states. So when we talk about licensure portability, it has a lot to do with time in terms of how long you've been licensed. And I guess essentially you could say your credibility, right? And so other things are considered in terms of your, so to speak, credibility and how you were able to port your licensure from one state to another. And there are a couple organizations that are helpful in this process. For psychology, there's the American Board of Professional Psychology, or the ABPP. And the ABPP has 13 different areas to which one can become essentially certified in. And as a person does that, then that essentially adds to their credibility, which can then add to that licensure portability from state to state. And then, of course, there are some requirements to be able to obtain that type of certification. But again, it can help in the process of being licensed in another state. In addition to that, there's a certificate of professional qualification, or the CPQ, and this is available and a part of, or it creates a relationship for 43 different states, and does again offer this idea of licensure portability. So one who's obtained a CPQ, ideally, right, would be able to use that to then be able to apply for licensure in another state and receive reciprocity based on what they've done for the CPQ. Then there's this idea of license through endorsement, which has to do more so with timing. There are many states that will say if you've been licensed for at least this many years, then you can receive license through endorsement, which again waives the requirements and essentially gives you that licensure portability based on your endorsement rather than any qualification specifically. Now, one thing about the ABPP, or the American Board of Professional Psychology, just recently I was looking up some of the requirements for certification, and previously there was like a 5-year requirement that you had to be licensed for a minimum of 5 years with, of course, no disciplinary actions before you could seek certification. And then that was also the same case for the CPQ. So as I revisited the ABPP website recently, I was very interested to find that the requirements seem to have shifted and they aren't as I would say stringent as what they may have been before. Now, of course, this is just colleague to colleague. I'm not speaking on behalf of the American Board of Professional Psychology, but I encourage you to visit some of those websites as they may apply to your specific license, right? If it's psychology, it would be them. But again, depending on your license, if there is a certification board, it seems that maybe post-pandemic, there has been an adjustment to some of the requirements for those various avenues. And so that would be something to look into as it also relates to your ability to navigate the multi-state licensing process as well. So just an invitation to just check it out and see if, maybe you've been waiting for something and now you don't have to. Double check and see. And in the worst case, it would be about a 5-year wait from the first time you became licensed. And then at that mark, you can really engage in the idea of reciprocity and this idea of endorsement and portability, et cetera, by going for some of these various credentials as they have their requirements set out. So I will double check to see what each of those are. But again, the associations and some of the professional associations that we may be a part of can also give some information about license portability and ways to navigate that process in your particular state. Now, as we talk about license portability, as I mentioned, the problem is that there's an inconsistency with the requirements that are set for each of the individual states. And this applies to pretty much every single mental health license, whether it's social work, MFT, right, psychology. And so these inconsistencies have really created a challenge for individuals to, again, just sort of port their qualifications from one state to the other. I mean, just imagine what it would be like to be fully licensed and then have to go do another set of hours so that you can become licensed in another state. And I'm sure individuals have had to do that. And just the thought of it is like, this is painful. I mean, we do it because that's what we have to do. But there are some organizations that have been putting some things in place in terms of legislation and working with different states to try to streamline the process for various mental health individuals. And as we experienced the pandemic and the impact of the mental health needs and the lack of services that were available and just the increased need in general, I think that states became a little bit more appreciative of the process that have been set in place, or at least attempting to set a process in place so that individuals can do work in nearby states and as it's needed in states throughout. So one example is PsyPact, the Psychology Interjurisdictional Compact, which is essentially a interstate compact, kind of like how our driver's licenses, right, have an interstate compact. You can drive in a certain state for a certain amount of time with a license from one state with no problem. If you think about even some of the advisory boards, there's various compacts, which are essentially states coming together to say, all right, we are going to agree on these, various components to say that a person with, said license can work in these particular states, with these certain boundaries in place to make sure that everyone gets the care that they need, and that essentially it wouldn't require that an individual become licensed in every single state, but also allow some assistance and support in some of that transitional piece as well when a person may be moving to another state. And as we all know as well, sometimes the state boards can take quite some time to process through paperwork, et cetera. And so that there's no lapse in not just service, but also in like work for individuals, then this is important so that there's this interstate sort of agreement between individuals to be able to make those transitions. So with PsyPact, it can be thought of as sort of a go-between or like a bridge for individuals who are moving from different states that want to be able to conduct temporary in-person, face-to-face treatment. And then it is also, though, a way to encourage telehealth so that there is a way for an individual in one state to be able to provide telehealth to a number of individuals in a number of states. And so PsyPact also offers what's called an e-passport certificate, and it's a process that begins with the ASPPB, for which houses all of our licensure information first. And then as you work through the process and obtain the passport, that then allows you to apply to PsyPact to then become approved, so to speak, to do telepsychology with a number of different states. Now, the caveat to this is that, again, everything depends on the state that you're currently in. Not all states are a part of this interjurisdictional compact. So unlike our driver's license, it doesn't include all of the states. Instead, there are a number of them, and they are still working to get more and more. As of spring of this year, there were 31 that had been enacted in 28 states that were actively involved in the compact. And hopefully, right, that's growing each quarter as we get more and more states to sign on. But if your state is not a part of the compact, then you're not going to be able to participate until your state becomes a part of the compact. So that is one limitation depending on where you're currently licensed, but it also again gives way to the conversation of becoming licensed in another state. If you become licensed in a state that is participating, then you have some different opportunities at that point. Now, the other areas or other agencies, I should say, that are also on this same page in terms of creating a streamless process for mental health individuals to be able to conduct treatment. And we just want to help people, right? We want to be able to do that easily without a whole bunch of hoops. And so the AAMFT, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, is the professional association for the field of marriage and family therapy. And again, much like for psychologists, for MFTs, for those that are licensed, the process of license portability has really been disjointed in different states. Again, there's many inconsistencies, and mostly because when it comes to the LMFTs, there is a statement essentially that those applying will need to prove that their qualifications are substantially equivalent to the requirements of the state that they're applying to. And that's a very subjective experience. And so you would think in theory that substantially equivalent would be logical, but the practice has shown that it creates additional barriers for those that are trying to become licensed in another state. And even in some cases where subjectivity in applying for the substantially equivalent policy has resulted in some of the LMFTs, and again, these are LMFTs, those who are already licensed, but it's resulted in them having to take the same classes over again. As I mentioned earlier, folks having to complete more hours of supervision. And so really making an effort to eliminate those different hurdles, the AAMFT has developed a model of MFT license portability in order to promote a more objective experience so that there's some level of standardization between states to increase that mobility in the world of MFT. So this is actually a full endorsement model, and that would again mean that if a MFT is licensed in one state, that their license would be valid and unrestricted as an MFT in another state as well, based on the fact that they're already licensed. So that is for the AAMFT. And then there's also a similar approach when it comes to social work. And again, this is because the social work licenses are issued at the state and provincial level, then it would be the same experience of having to apply to practice in every single state. And so given that there's that same question of how to create a process of endorsement or some type of licensing by portability, or some portability to the licensure, so that a person may become licensed by endorsement and have that reciprocity experience from state to state. So it depends again on how many states are, I guess, in terms of the political part of things, are willing to fight to become a part of these different agreements, so that then the streamlining does actually happen across all states rather than just a handful of those who are considering the process. So again, with the ASWB, they have worked for years to try to help lawmakers and state regulators to adopt policies to promote such practice, but we're still in the making. So we can't give up yet. It's still in the process. But along those same lines, as we're talking about some of these different agencies that are working to try to streamline this process for us, if that's also an interest of yours, if you feel like that might be a place where you want to, give some time and effort, I'm sure that there are committees and et cetera that may be something that is worth looking into, just to even become a part of the process to hurry this change along, because we definitely need it. Now, there's also, when it comes to counseling, there's also license portability, and that would be through the American Counseling Association. And again, this is where a counselor will meet a certain number of requirements, and based on that, then they would be able to move from state to state, easily obtaining license from where between the different states without having to do a lot of extra prerequisite work. Now, the ACA advises states again, but it's the states who are going to have the final say when it comes to licensure and license portability. So again, I would be checking in with these various organizations to see kind of what progress has been made given your various license and what you can expect as you embark upon the multi-state licensing process. Now, lastly, we have the NBCC, which is the National Board for Certified Counselors. Again, another agency that's really along that same mindset of how can we streamline this process and create more of an endorsement process where someone who has been licensed at the highest level can obtain licensure in other states if a certain level of criteria have been met. And again, those criteria are always going to include that there's been no disciplinary actions. Note here that this is for at least that they've been engaged in at least 5 years of practice. And so based on the updates in some of the ASPPB material, this is also worth visiting to see if perhaps they're making some adjustments in the time frame. But in the worst case scenario, it would be 5 years. And again, for someone who is a certified counselor to be able to apply that certification and licensure to other states without much hassle. So again, some agencies to keep in mind. These are not the only agencies that are oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my slide and I believe that it cut some things off. So I'm just going to tell you about this instead. We're not done yet, so we'll stay here. The agencies that I listed are not the only ones that have some mindset or idea of trying to streamline this process. So I don't want to say that they're the only ones, but definitely ones that are spearheading this and to consider if you are considering the multi-state licensing process. Now, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about telehealth. And my apologies, I think the world of technology came in and stole 2 of my slides. I don't know what happened here, but I can tell you about this instead. Now, telehealth is something that I think by now we're all pretty familiar with the idea of how this works, via a virtual experience with our client or patient on the other end. And so as we talk about telehealth, it definitely aligns with the conversation of multi-state licensing. In the very least, if you're not interested in moving anywhere, you don't want to set up shop anywhere, being able to do telehealth in other states could also be another way to grow your practice. And so as you are considering telehealth, a couple of things to be considerate of would be the informed consent. You want to make sure that in your informed consent form, you have a statement about the virtual experience and the confidentiality, et cetera, that is appropriate for technology. Along with that, the security certifications that are required for whatever the model or platform is that you're using, whether it be Zoom or some other virtual platform. And then also when it comes to confidentiality, depending on the individual or individuals that you're working with, it may or may not be appropriate as you're having perhaps a video experience or even over the phone, but to maybe ask who's in the room, right? And to just get like a verbal confirmation that a person is alone to ensure the confidentiality of the experience altogether, right? Like the person might say, oh, well, I don't care if my sister's in here or my cousin, it doesn't matter. But when we think about maintaining, the authenticity of that confidentiality piece that comes along with therapy, we want to encourage that I want to encourage you to take that into consideration in making sure that it is actually a confidential experience. And then of course, when it comes to doing things online, we want to take advantage of electronic documents. And so reconsidering maybe your intake forms and the way that you administer them or maybe receive them, and making sure that they actually are, as easily recorded as possible and you're not doing more work than you need to. Now, we already know when it comes to telehealth that it's going to be able to increase your clientele, but also it does eliminate your ratio of no-shows. It's a lot more likely for someone to be able to show up if all they have to do is get on their phone, and use their camera to have their session, if it avoids maybe traffic or having to make the drive, which for some individuals can really break down some barriers for mental health if they can do it from their home. Also, being able to challenge us as clinicians to use our methods in a very different way. Sometimes certain things that we've done so long face to face are going to be totally different when we do them online. So that challenge is something to welcome as you are embarking upon that experience. And then when we talk about being able to participate in therapy in a comfortable setting, which telehealth definitely provides, that also can give a comfortability for you as the clinician to do your therapy in a comfortable setting, which actually could make the process even more enjoyable. So that is my bit about telehealth. I told you we didn't exactly need the slide. Now I can say thank you and welcome you to the exclusive offer from AATBS that participants from this workshop can save 30% on all of our CE courses by using the code, which will be included at the end of this. And then I will turn it over to Chuck or Ashley, I believe.
Thank you, Dr. Stanton. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's Andrea. There we go.
Yes, Andrea. Yep. Thank you. What a great presentation. A lot of really valuable information about multi-state licensure and telehealth. So thank you. There were a ton of questions, so we're going to circle back to those in a minute. But just did want to touch upon very briefly in regards to therapy sites. So this presentation was brought to you by Therapy Sites. We work with mental health professionals to help them create a professional looking website and ensure they can be found online and when their clients are searching in order to help increase new client acquisition. We encourage the practices we work with to build a website that's a reflection of themselves, but also to help them create a marketing strategy that allows them to achieve their goals. Our solutions make it easy to schedule appointments online, create a network of referrals via social media, and even the ability to interact with their clients virtually anywhere from our telehealth platform. As a special thank you for being here today, we are extending a special webinar offer of 2 free months of our telecounseling and SEO services to help you accomplish your practice goals. So if you'd like to learn more about therapy sites and see how we can help attract more new clients to your practice, send us a quick email at webinar@therapysites.com, or feel free to call us at 866-255-8745. So again, we have a ton of questions. So Dr. Stanton, if you wouldn't mind, let me just pop back into those and let's see if we can't get a couple of them answered with the time that we have left.
Perfect.
So the first one is, how long is the wait after applying for telehealth national coverage?
I'm not familiar with the wait or actually what the national coverage they might be referring to. If it's the SIPAC process, I think because of some of the entities that are involved, it may take a little bit of time. I think it's probably fair to say nothing's quick when we have to deal with some of these outside agents. So plan for it to take a little bit of time, but I'm not sure what they're talking about specifically.
Okay. All right. Let's see. If I move to a different state but only keep my clients from the original state, is that considered multi-state licensing or license portability?
That's considered neither, because literally no, because you're just staying in your state. So the portability piece would be when you're actually using your license in another state, and the portability is what allows you to become licensed in another state, right? To offer that multi-state experience. So if a person moved to another state and they kept their same clients, then the challenge would be, again, what their the state that they're licensed under, right? Their licensing board, and what has been stated as the policy when it comes to going to another state and how that works. It just, because again, it depends state by state. And then some states have regulations about how long you can do that, et cetera. So I would consult with the board that you are currently licensed under to see how does that work if you move to another state but still keep your same people.
Okay. All right. Asking for some advice for folks licensed in multiple states regarding documentation and requirements. So I'm not sure about that one. Let me maybe just.
If anything, if it's like I would just say to maybe get a Excel document or just keep a file for each state so that you're aware, and then like kind of tag your calendar so you know when to do
Good
your different
idea.
things.
Yep. Let me just see. There was a couple of questions in regards to tax from various states and how that might impact a therapist license in a specific area.
Absolutely. So I'm glad we're thinking that way, because that's another
Yeah,
piece that we have to be considerate of when it comes to the multi-state piece of it. If you're licensed in another state and conducting work in that state, then in the very least, right, you'd have to pay the state taxes for that particular state. So, but I would say we definitely are not money people. Consult with a CPA or someone that, you know, is in that accounting world to be able to give you the best practices to maintain all the documents you need for each of the states.
perfect. Couple questions came in regards to CPQ. Some
Yes.
asking for a little bit more information, some asking where do you get it? So a couple
Okay.
questions there.
So the CPQ is the Certificate for Professional Experience. I mean, for professional qualification. Sorry, I'm making stuff up. The Certificate for Professional Qualification. And it is, again, I would like to say that it's changed a bit in terms of the qualifications that are required to obtain it, as I was mentioning about that 5 years. And so depending on the updated information, I would go looking for it in that regard.
Okay, perfect. And a couple of questions talking about malpractice insurance. How does that work with telehealth with other states?
And I'm sorry, I don't know if really quick, the first question about where do you find the information, everything goes back to the ASPPB. So
Okay,
if someone was looking for information about the CPQ, it's going to be through the ASPPB. Same
okay,
thing for the e-certificate as well for someone who's interested in SIPACT.
okay, perfect.
But okay, go ahead.
Um,
You said another one?
no, they just had questions in regards to, malpractice insurance working via telehealth platform.
And that I would be determined by your actual insurance. And then I think just again, when it comes to the informed consent forms and those security certificates, that you make sure that those statements and those certificates align with the requirements for your malpractice insurance.
Okay. Um, Question came in regards to how do you apply for multi-state licensure? Is there a specific location that you have to fill out an application, somewhere to get somebody started?
That would be great. That would so be awesome if we had one place, but that is the problem. No, literally, right? Like literally that's a problem. Hopefully one day we will have one location like the ASPPB or something like that to be able to go to apply for multiple states. But as it is now, there is the SIPACT component to allow someone to be able to start the process to do telehealth in various states if their state is a part of the compact. And then it also allows a person to begin the process of working in another state while they are going through the licensing process without having to be on hold or be limited to, some states say you can only work for 30 days or something like that without,
Mhm.
being licensed in that state. So that compact does it increases some or it allows or provides some flexibility for becoming licensed in multi-states, but it's still not a one-stop shop. And so the best place to begin is to think to yourself, what makes sense? Right? Where do I want to be licensed at? What makes sense for where I'm currently licensed in terms of like where you'll get people to work with, right? We don't want to just have a whole bunch of licenses. We definitely want to be able to do some work. So thinking first about what does that look like, maybe having some conversations with some people that are licensed in nearby states to ask them like, what is their work kind of capacity look like in those other places, and then go to those states online, not physically, but go to those states into their boards and determine what is that process for someone who's already licensed, because there's usually a different paragraph for the person who's already licensed.
Okay. Let's see. It looks like we've got a couple more minutes, so we'll take a couple more questions. Looks like One just came in. My client moved to another state and still wants to be my client. The client's insurance is still the same. Is that become an issue, or can I continue to work with that client, or am I required to then become multi-state licensed?
So that also, and I know it's probably getting old because I keep saying it depends, but it really does. It depends on the state, and like the state that the person is licensed in and the state that their client has moved to. And because there are certain provisions, like if the person is a resident still, like are they there for short term? Is it long term? Because that might also affect how if or not the person even has to terminate therapy. They may not have to if the person is coming back or if they're still considered a resident of the
Okay.
particular state. But those things I would double check with the board to determine how that works with that particular board, and then also with that particular insurance.
Okay.
Because they may still have the same insurance, but if they've moved to a different state, it may not be exactly the same insurance.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Couple questions coming in regards to fees. I feel like you touched upon it briefly, but I'm assuming that that depends on which state.
You know it.
Let's
Like
see.
fees as in what are the fees for multi-state licensing?
Yep.
Yeah, it depends on all the different states have their own fees, and then it also is going to depend on what the actual requirements become. And then there are also some fees associated with becoming a part of like, SciPact and some of the other organizations, even some of the associations that I mentioned, but
hmm
that it's not necessary that you'll have to pay a fee to become multi-state licensed outside of the state, the fees that the state requires.
Okay.
So in other words, you might not have to pay an organization, but just depending on what route you take and how you want to go about it.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Let's see. Licensed in California after COVID, some of the states allowed other state therapists to practice through telehealth. Is this still the case? Any additional information on the current status? So I'm assuming you probably have to check by state.
Yes, and I'm actually licensed in California also, and I'm painfully aware that the state of California continues to like be this anomaly, and we don't really participate in anything. So the like SciPact, for instance, is not something that California participates in. So that immediately puts some limitations on for instance, like psychologists to be able to have that immediate access to other states. So I don't know what the provisions are in terms of the pandemic. I mean, like I don't, because it's been so long now, I don't know how that would work in terms of, or what the specific question is to
hmm
that, right? Like, is it that the person moved, or what are we
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. Let's see. A couple questions coming in, if a client just goes on vacation. So obviously we wouldn't be required to have a multi-state license because the client is just on vacation for a short term, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay. Let's see. I think that about covers a good chunk of what was being asked.
Oh,
Any
perfect.
parting words or any final thoughts as far as suggestions or helpful hints for the folks that joined us?
The biggest help I think would be just to be ready to read, and if anytime you were going to become an avid researcher, now's the time, to be really detailed oriented when it comes to the various requirements and making sure that you check all the boxes, kind of going back into the days of becoming licensed to begin with, but just being excited about it, because again, it is going to create tons of opportunity, and staying the course even though it might seem a little full of tedious tasks. That's what we'll do, and then it'll be over. So just get it done if that's what you want to do.
Yeah. Well, I
Perfect.
appreciate it, Dr. Stanton. That was a great webinar. I appreciate everybody's time, all our attendees. I think we learned a lot, so that was absolutely fantastic. And just so everybody knows, after this webinar, we will be, as long as you registered for the webinar, we will be sending a copy of the recording out to everybody. So check your emails by tomorrow. Everybody should receive a copy. Again, thanks everyone, and hopefully we'll be talking to everyone soon. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.